Hello, I'm Natasha Scannell, and I will be presenting The Search for Life, Exoplanet Detection with Deep Learning. For centuries, humans have searched for a meaning to their existence and tried to assess their significance in the universe. As our knowledge of the universe has expanded, questions like, why are we here, have evolved to, are there more beings like us in the universe, or are we alone? This image by NASA and ESA, the European Space Agency, depicts countless galaxies that are in the field of view of the Hubble telescope. On average, a galaxy contains about 100 million stars. Many of these may have orbiting planets much like our solar system. This curiosity about our significance and the possible existence of other intelligent beings in the universe has inspired generations. However, the first confirmed exoplanets were not discovered until the early 1990s. Over the next decade, about 50 more exoplanets were discovered. The Kepler Space Telescope was launched in 2009 with the primary goal of finding Earth-sized planets in the Goldilocks zone of their systems. This zone is the distance from their star at which a planet is capable of containing liquid water, which we know from our planet to be necessary to support life. Over 2,600 exoplanets have been discovered and confirmed from Kepler data, with thousands more awaiting confirmation. Over 600 gigabytes of data was produced that is still being analyzed. It is very recent that machine learning, deep learning in particular, has been applied to this data. Next, I'll briefly discuss related work for using deep learning for exoplanet detection. In particular, I'll focus on AstroNet. Christopher Chaloux of Google Brain and Andrew Vanderberg of UT Austin experimented with linear regression, fully connected networks, and convolutional neural networks on light curve data from Kepler to compare the performance of these models on exoplanet detection. Light curves from Kepler contain light measurements from a target star over time. When a planet transits or crosses a star, it causes a periodic dimming in the light measurement called a threshold crossing event, or TCE. The collected light curves were normalized and folded to produce global and local views of a TCE, as shown in the top right figure. I used the open-source dataset from Chaloux and Vanderberg to train my models. The best performing model they developed was AstroNet, a convolutional neural network developed in TensorFlow with separate convolutional columns for each of the two views, as depicted on the left. Each red block depicts a convolutional layer. First number is the filter size, second is the number of filters. Each blue block depicts a max pooling layer. The first number is the filter size, second number is stride length. The yellow layers are fully connected layers. Finally, the output layer uses the sigmoid function to determine the probability that a sample contains an exoplanet. AstroNet achieved an accuracy of 0.96 on the test set, precision 0.90, recall 0.95, and AUC of 0.988. This brings me to my primary research questions. Firstly, how do other neural architectures perform on exoplanet detection, and how does their performance compare to AstroNet? Secondly, can AstroNet be scaled down to be more efficient but remain competitive in its performance? Next, I'll discuss my approaches and results of these methods. The first tested neural architecture was LSTMs because they're developed for sequential data and light curves are a time series. On the right, we have an example LSTM architecture for exoplanet detection. Separate LSTM layers were used for each of the two inputs. The outputs were concatenated and passed through a series of dense layers before a sigmoid output layer. Architectures varied in the number of LSTM layers for each column, the number of units for each layer, and whether regularization was used. Additionally, the number of dense layers, number of neurons in those layers, and the amount of dropout varied between tested architectures. In the example diagram, you can see some of the experimental values or ranges for each of the layers. LSTM6 was the best performer of all LSTM models. This architecture is described in the figure on the left. As can be seen in the loss in accuracy plots at the top, training hit convergence, but this model is slightly overfit. Despite this, this model had an accuracy of 0.92 on the test set, precision 0.79, recall 0.87, and AUC 0.97. The second architecture I experimented with was convolutional LSTMs, which introduced convolutional columns before the LSTM layers. The image on the right shows a general example of the architecture. Each model varied in the number of convolutional blocks for each column. Each convolutional layer varied in the number of filters and the filter size. The second convolutional layer in a block was always identical to the first. Inputs were zero padded to avoid downsampling in convolutional layers. The max pooling layer in each block varied in the window size, but always used stride of 2. These models also varied in the same way as the LSTM models, with the number of LSTM layers and their units, amount of regularization, number of dense layers and their neurons, and dropout. This is one of the first iterations of the CNN LSTM model. The architecture is shown in the diagram on the left. As can be seen by the loss curves of this model, it is severely overfit. Despite the overfitting, this model was the best performer of the CNN LSTMs on the test set, with test set accuracy of 0.95, precision 0.90, recall 0.91, and AUC 0.98. Adding the convolutional blocks greatly boosted the precision. Besides experimenting with other neural architectures, I wanted to try to scale down AstroNet to develop a more efficient architecture with comparable performance. The CNN model has a similar structure to AstroNet. Iterations had varying number of convolutional blocks for each input. Each convolutional block had a varying number of filters and filter size for the convolutional layers, and varying sizes for the window size of max pooling layers. Additionally, a varying number of dense layers were tested with varying number of neurons and dropout. Here's the best performing CNN, with the architecture on the left. This model is also a little overfit, but contains 8 times fewer trainable parameters than AstroNet. This model has the same accuracy of 0.96 and AUC of 0.99 as AstroNet, slightly better precision of 0.91, and slightly worse recall of 0.93. Next, I'll compare the best performers to AstroNet. I recreated AstroNet in Keras as a baseline. As can be seen in the accuracy and loss plots, AstroNet is overfit. The Keras implementation had the same test set accuracy and AUC as the original, but slightly worse precision at 0.89 compared to AstroNet's 0.90, and slightly better recall with 0.96 compared to AstroNet's 0.95. Here, I have a comparison of the top performer in the 3 architecture types for exoplanet detection. The pure LSTM clearly did not perform as well as the other architectures. I believe the primary reason is due to the way the dataset is represented. The folded light curves contain only one dip, which makes spatial features more apparent or important than temporal features. Perhaps it is worthwhile in future work to test the LSTMs on unfolded light curve data to determine if it is a problem with the representation or if they just aren't a good fit for this problem. The convolutional LSTM is pretty competitive. It is just 1% behind in accuracy. This model has about 59 times fewer trainable parameters than AstroNet. The addition of the convolutional layers boosted all metrics, precision in particular, which further supports the idea that spatial features are more prevalent than temporal features in the folded light curve. The scaled-down convolutional network is comparable to AstroNet with the same accuracy and AUC on the test set, slightly better precision, and slightly worse recall. This model has 8 times fewer trainable parameters than AstroNet. This proves that AstroNet is unnecessarily complex and inefficient. It is worth fine-tuning a more efficient network that performs as well or better. In general, neural networks that are too complicated suffer in performance compared to more efficient models. It is vital for all applications of deep learning to ensure that the model is efficient and properly developed for the given task. In future work, the dataset should be expanded to include stellar parameters and centroid curves. It has been proven that the centroid curves and stellar parameters are essential for a network to better distinguish between exoplanet transits and eclipsing binary stars, and will boost the model's precision. Thank you.